welcome to Let's Talk About Skills, Baby. I am your host, Kelly Ryan Bailey. Each week, I chat with inspiring visionaries about the skills that make them successful, how they developed those skills, and their innovative approaches to improving skills-based hiring and learning around the world. Come learn what skills help you live your best life. This week, I'm joined by Margot Cairnes. I really hope that I pronounced that correctly, Margot, but please. We've practiced a few times now. Please correct me if I completely butchered that. I apologize. Did I get it?
It's close enough.
Okay. All right. I'm going to keep practicing. Thank you, Margot. You're so gracious. Well, let me introduce Margot really quickly, everyone. Margot has had a global career delivering large-scale transformation projects for multinationals and governments. She has presented on leadership and change at the World Economic Forum and shared a stage with Hillary Clinton and Queen Rania of Jordan in New York City's womenfuture.com. Working as a coach and advisor to boards and top teams in Europe, Asia, the United States, and Australia, Margot has used her compelling approach to strategy development to help leaders widen and deepen their thinking, develop creativity, effectively problem solve, and develop stronger, more robust stakeholder relationships. Through applying her transformational skills strategy formula and culture change, she has helped the top teams and boards of Fletcher Challenge, Energy, BP, and Amoco Oil, to name a few. Margot has mentored distinguished industry leaders, including Paul Anderson, MD of BHP Billington, Les Shirato, MD of Cantarella Brothers Group, Greg Gailey, chairman of Caltex and former president of the BCA, and Dr. Rolf Stromberg, Global MD of BP Oil. Hopefully I got close to those pronunciations as well. She is an international. Did I get it? Okay, close.
Doing fine, yeah. Thumbs up.
Thank you. She is an international best-selling author with 6 books on transformational leadership. She addresses Fortune 500 chief executive officers and directors, global political leaders, and members of international think tanks, as well as organizations which include BHP Billington, Reserve Bank of Australia, Alcoa, NAB, and Levi Strauss. The American biographical, oh my goodness, thank you. I am just tongue-tied. Biographical Institute has named Margot one of the great minds of the 21st century. David Williamson, who is Australia's leading playwright, even based his play Corporate Vibes on Margot's book, Peaceful Chaos. She is an internationally recognized expert on navigating complex change and wicked problems derived from major disruptions, including AI, cybersecurity, automation, and big data. Margot, my goodness, this is amazing. But honestly, the first question that just came to my mind was, when I just described wicked problems, is that just what it means, like crazy problems? Or does that mean something in particular?
It's a technical term.
I did not.
So we used to have can I define it for you?
Please.
We used to have tame problems. So tame problems are, you know what the problem is, you can solve it, you can measure that you've solved it, you can watch someone solving it and learn and do better next time. However, a wicked problem, you don't even know what the problem is, because every stakeholder thinks the problem's a different problem. So the example I give is brain surgery is a tame problem. Really hard, really complicated, takes years to train, right? An amazingly complex tame problem. Changing the health system, as you guys know in America, is a wicked problem. Everybody sees it as different, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're an old person, a young person, whether you're an alternative practitioner, a nurse, a doctor, a patient, whatever, maybe someone with a disability. Everybody sees the problem differently. So if you can't even define the problem, how can you know if you've solved it or not?
Yeah.
That's a wicked problem.
Okay.
And because the world is getting more complex, because the world is more connected, more and more and more of our problems are wicked. Now, the problem is most of us are trained to solve tame problems.
Mm.
Right? That's what I've got all these degrees. They're all in solving tame problems. They're not in solving wicked problems. Whereas when I was up working at that very top end of business globally, all the problems were wicked. They were all wicked. So we had to find whole new ways of dealing with them.
Well, tell us, like, what are some of these whole new ways of dealing with these types of problems that you've learned over time?
I have a lovely little diagram, which I don't have nearby, so I'll try and walk you through it. But the first is you have to decide, is it a wicked problem? And I have a whole checklist of, things you just go through. Are there more than one points of view? Are you stuck? Is everybody blaming everybody else because you can't solve it? There's a whole, are there many dimensions? Is the problem clear? If you look at the clear problem to 6 people, is it the same? Right? So there's all this checklist you go through. Is this a wicked problem? Now, once you know it's a wicked problem, then you actually visualize the desired outcome, because you have to get into a different mode. So we have, this is Ken Wilber stuff, but we have monological thinking, which is what my degrees trained me to do, where I sit here and I look at the world and I study the world and I come up with a nice, neat solution for the world. Then there's a dialogical way of thinking. That means I'm interacting with the world. And as I do that, the world changes and I've changed. And then there's translogical thinking. Now, translogical thinking is what happens when we meditate, when we pray, when we visualize, right? Mm-hmm. We go into an altered alpha state. So what the first part is, you go through the sort of the rational thing and a dialogical thing, actually. Is this a wicked problem? Then we go into a translogical thing, which is, well, what's our desired outcome? Now, I can tell you, Kelly, I've worked with groups of people, and I'm talking about top teams of major corporations, who would not get in the same room. They would not get in the same room. The conflict in that team, those teams, it was more than one, those teams, it was so great that they refused to meet. Firstly, I'd get them to meet. It was a process, a one-on-one process. But then I'd get them to visualize an outcome. And even if they hated each other, even if they haven't met for 6 months in some cases, they all saw the same outcome.
Interesting.
Right? So once we got people to see the same outcome, then you realize that you can't solve a wicked problem. There is no way to solve a wicked problem, because as you work with them, they change. Right? They say you can't solve a wicked problem, you just run out of resources. So then you realize that working with wicked problem, what you're actually doing is building the capacity in the leaders. You're building the capacity in the people who are working with the wicked problem. That's the whole aim of the idea. It's not to solve the problem. It's actually to build the capacity so that whatever problem turns up, you can work with it better next time. And this is just, I call them living case studies. The wicked problem is just what turned up today for you to work on. Sorry, I'm talking a lot, but I'll just give you an example, because it's quite a complex concept. But I did the merger of BP and Mobil oil across Europe. That was a big merger. Then I did the merger of BP and Amoco oil across the Atlantic. Now, Amoco did not want to be merged with BP if BP was merged with with whoever it was, Mobil in Europe. So then we had to go back to Europe and do a demerger. So that's a merger, a demerger. Now, most people after that collapse, their marriages get sick, they end up in hospital, they have a heart attack, they retire. My people thought it was the most exciting, interesting, fantastic learning time in their career. Because they weren't doing a merger, and a demerger. What they were doing was learning to work with wicked problems. And today's wicked problem was this merger, and then tomorrow's wicked problem was that merger. And the whole aim of the exercise is to build the people, build the relationships, build the community, so that next time a wicked problem turns up, you can deal with it. Right? So they were really blessed. In 18 months, they had three huge wicked problems.
I feel like what you were really doing was like changing their mindset, the way that they're viewing
everything.
Yeah.
And because we did it dialogically, that is, we did it in relationship, right? They're actually doing it, they're learning by doing.
Yes.
And they're building their relationships, building their sense of self, and they're building their capacity, and then they're taking that through the whole organization to their people. So these things were mean, literally, I used to call them miracles. So
Wow.
my clients would go from being the worst performing division in the world to the best performing division in 18 months. Or they'd go from being the worst industrial site in Australia to being the world benchmark in 18 months, right? But it was such a different way of working that people, even today, still don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. And it's interesting to me how you said too that, you know, in going through education with your degrees, that wasn't the way that you were trained to through school, it sounds like. To
That's not exactly true because
okay.
my first degree was in early childhood education.
Ah,
So I'm a trained preschool teacher.
okay.
Right now, I have to say I've got all sorts of other trainings as well, but my basic training was as a preschool teacher.
Uh-huh.
And we were trained to go to the child and you work with the child, right? So the whole concept of being a preschool teacher is to develop the capacity of the child.
Mm-hmm.
So I still did it. They just happened to be the biggest kids in the world.
Right. That's so amazing. So, you know, because now that well, thank you so much for describing this in such detail, because I think it's really helpful to understand what that process is. And it really has to do a lot with your work. But before we kind of jump into your work, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you know, I've shared the highlights, but a little bit more about your journey to what has led you here today and coming at this with from the consulting perspective.
Well, you will not surprise you to hear that my journey has been a wicked problem.
That doesn't surprise me.
So I married ridiculously young, had children ridiculously young, went back to university, and I actually had my first child while I was studying to do my first degree. I got what they call the university medal. You have something cum laude, you call it in the States.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But they didn't do that every year. I was the first in 40 years.
Oh
So
wow.
despite the fact that I was a mother most of the time, I took out this thing called the University Medal. I also won the Department of Education prize for being the best theoretical and practical teacher to graduate that year.
Wow.
But there were no jobs. There were no jobs. There was a glut of teachers, and I was told that there was a list, a seniority list, and as a new graduate, I'd go on the bottom of that list and there'd be a job in 7 years.
Oh my.
So at about that time, my husband decided he'd like to go to the Northern Territory, which is at the top end of Australia. It's very remote. We'd had Cyclone Tracy not a whole lot of time before that. And there was just no one there with any degree. They just didn't exist. So I went to put my little girl in occasional care and walked out as the managing director of a thing called Darwin Family Centres, which was, this was my first job out of university. And I was responsible for all the childcare and family support for the top end of Australia.
Wow.
So I had over 1,000 children in care every day. I had childcare centres, I had family daycare centres, I had social work centres, I had mobile education centres.
Oh my
and
goodness.
you know, what did I know? Nothing. I mean, I had a degree, but I did nothing. So I just had to learn as I went. I just had to learn as I went. Now, unfortunately, my husband was very jealous of my success. He'd married a beautiful, long-haired, blue-eyed blonde who was very young. And all of a sudden, here she was, the managing director of this major community organisation. And every second day I was in the newspaper. And he got very jealous and quite violent. So we decided at that stage that we'd come back and do an MBA. So we did that. And again, I kept beating him. I mean, by then I had another child, I worked full time, and I still, came in the top 2 or 3, and he wasn't. And by that, the violence in the marriage was just too great, and I had to leave. When about 2 years after that, my daughter had what they call an arrest. So her heart stopped beating and she stopped breathing. And I resuscitated her. It's a miracle. She's a miracle that she's alive. And it was the stress of the divorce and, all of that. She just didn't have the skills to deal with it coming from the highly dysfunctional family that we were. And so I stopped work altogether. I mean, having when I finished my MBA, I was being headhunted by all the biggest companies in the world, and all the major consulting firms in the world were offering huge amounts of money to have me come work for them. And I had a child that needed 24-hour-a-day nursing.
Mm.
So I said, well, thanks, but no thanks. And I took a year off and I stayed home and nursed my daughter. And at the same time, my dad had cancer
Oh,
and he came to live with me so I could nurse him until he died. So I nursed my daughter and my father, and I had a gorgeous little boy who I think got the short end of the stick, but there's so much energy in a person in a day, and when you're just
yep.
trying to keep people alive, that's where your energy goes. Um, anyway, Dad died in amazing peace. The nurses told me it was the most peaceful death they'd ever seen, and my little girl got better. And I said, look, I'll just give a talk. I'm pretty good at giving talks. I'll go and give a talk. And I gave a talk, and there were men in this place that said, our boss needs you. And I went down to a place called Portland Aluminium Smelter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Portland Aluminium Smelter was the biggest aluminium smelter in the Southern Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
I got in through a picket line. There was the most industrial unrest of any site in Australia.
Wow.
People were dying of industrial asthma. The community hated them because they were polluting the environment. And 18 months later, they were the world benchmark for the world benchmark culture for an aluminium smelter.
Wow.
So now, in the meanwhile, I trained as a psychotherapist because I had to find out what was going wrong with my life and how could I fix that up. And so, I was using a lot of those skills. And yeah, so once it became the world benchmark, I just was headhunted to travel around the world and work with the top teams and boards of global corporations.
That's amazing.
Doing what I called miracles.
Yeah. That's amazing. It sounds like too that, what sort of this like early beginnings for you, these challenges that you went through in life really helped you understand, because this mindset that you're helping people develop, I'm going to say that it's called a mindset, but like working through these style of problems, because you're really kind of like getting to that point. You had to develop that mindset for yourself, and you were like the guinea pig.
Yep. Absolutely. And I used to pray that, Kelly. I used to say, God, please, whatever I go through, let me use it to help other people. If
Wow.
I can use anything that I'm learning to help other people, then this is a blessing.
Yeah.
And that's what I prayed constantly.
Mm-hmm. Wow. This is like, you're just so strong. I'm like, oh my goodness. So tell me, like a mother to mother, now I'm curious, when you started taking these other opportunities and you're traveling and all that, and it sounds like at the time you were also a single mother. So how did you handle all that?
Well, I didn't travel for a long time.
Okay.
Then I remarried and I did start to travel again. But by then they were older. They were early teens.
Okay.
You've got to remember, I started really young. I say I got married when I was 6 and had children when I was 7. I started really
Of course. No, yeah. I mean, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, I come from a town called Newcastle in New South Wales, and that's what we did. We got married early and had kids early.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what girls did in those days. I mean, now I've got to tell you, other girls I went to school with are now professors and doctors and judges, and because we wake up, we left Newcastle, we thought, oh, girls can do something more than just have babies.
Yeah. Well, did you ever, I mean, again, this is just my mother to mother question, and I hope you don't mind. I don't feel like you have to answer this, but I'm curious now that we're having this discussion, because, in the whole scheme of things, like you're actually reminding me, I was young when I started having children in the whole scheme of things. Like I realize in the rest of the world, but where I'm from, having a baby at 25 was young, So, so when I know, right? It's not normally, but around in the Northeast in the US, most people are getting married like mid 30s and then thinking about children. So like for me to be married and having children, 10 years prior to that was sort of like the big thing. But the question is, as a mother that is, having this success and also the obvious need of the children to be cared for, you know, and especially with what your daughter went through, I'm curious, not only your thoughts around, like, did you ever feel at all that, I can't think of the right word, but that strain or that stress that you feel making the choice to like step away, or feeling like you couldn't go after maybe some of these things? Or was that just did you ever struggle with that?
Look, Kelly, I didn't have a choice. I was a single mother.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, by not working for a year, after, you know, by the time my dad had died and my daughter got better, I was in debt. I mean, I had to work. I
Yeah.
didn't, and my ex-husband was horrendous. You know, he went on being abusive. I had no extended family.
Mm.
I had no choice.
Yeah.
Now, when I often say to people, when I look back, my strongest memory is exhaustion, because it wasn't that I did less. I just did everything. And, you know, meanwhile, writing books and flying around the world and doing
Yeah.
interview work and, you know, like, and it was a great relief. Oh, you gone?
No, I'm
It was a
here.
great relief.
Yeah.
Good. It was a great relief about 10 years ago, when I basically moved up to Byron Bay and lived on a farm, because I
Yeah.
stopped being tired. But, you know, really, until then, I just was tired all the
You just kept going.
time.
Yeah.
Oh, what else do you do?
Yeah. It's interesting. I always find this interesting. I wonder out loud if men feel the same way. Like, as when you're a mother, you just keep going. Like, and I don't know if this is the same. If I'd be curious to know, any
Well,
men can send in messages and let us know, but I'm curious if it's the same.
well, you know, I am a feminist, and I had a son and a daughter, and I did my best to bring them both up as sort of androgynously, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
unisex educated. I have the most blokey bloke of the son and the most girly girl of the daughter you could possibly meet. My son is a very successful entrepreneur who has a wife who had a very high powered job. You know, she was one of the top government officials in the country. She stayed home and is still home looking after the three children. And my daughter has married an incredibly successful entrepreneur, and she stays home and looks after the children. So, you know, here am I doing it all as a single parent. And I look at those boys and I know they have no clue of the amount of support that they're getting. And
Yeah.
they're getting it from highly educated, incredibly intelligent, competent women who just remove all the things that I had to do on top of.
Yeah.
They have not a clue, and they never will.
No. No, that's so fascinating. It's so interesting how these dynamics end up playing out. But I really think that a lot of this stuff that we're talking about has to do with, you know, bringing it kind of back to your story and what you focus on. This idea, because our focus and our view of life, also the perception that we have, right? I'm sure that that also affects people and how they deal with these like wicked problems, as you call them, and that particular term. But I'm sure that everyone has a slightly different view. So let's bring it back to that for a moment, if you don't mind. Because everyone has a different way. I mean, it sounds like you really have to personalize this work with each individual.
Ooh, I'm not sure I understand the question. I'll answer the question as I understand, and you can tell me
Okay.
what the question really was. So because I have multiple trainings, I do a lot of one-on-one work, but I also do a lot of group work.
Okay.
And I do it around reality. So my favorite book title is "We've had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world is getting worse." And it's written by a Jungian analyst, Robert Johnson. And basically what he says is that maybe it wasn't Bob, it doesn't matter who it was, but it was a Jungian analyst, a very, very famous one. It's a great book. I've only read it once, but I've been quoting it for 20 years.
I'll
But what he
look
says
it
is
up.
if we only work on ourselves, we disappear up our own bottom. We just become more and more and more self-centered. So the way around that is you work on yourself, and then you take your growing self to a group problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you take your growing self to something that's going to make the world a better place.
Uh-huh.
So that, and I see, so there are so many coaches and there are so many personal development courses, and I go, Do we have better leaders? Do we have more ethical leaders? Is the
Right.
world getting better? I'm not sure. If we and so I believe we have to work with the whole system. So as you change one person, you change their concept of the system. But
Hmm.
unless you then bring that with them into the system, they just go back to the way they were before. They
That's
just make a little
interesting.
tiny change over here.
I didn't even think of that, but it's true. When you think about like learning in general, a lot of times if you don't actually put that into practice in some way, then it's sort of just like in and out of your mind. So it
Mhm.
does make a lot of sense.
And that's what makes the miracle. That's what makes the difference between nice to have and a miracle. And I have found that people resist that. They love coaching. They love training. They hate having to do it. So, I have always said, unless you give me a strategic issue to work with, I can't get you the miracle. I can get you this, but if you want that, if you want the
Right.
world, if you want to break through and I've got to tell you, my clients have literally made billions of dollars more working with me.
Wow.
If you want that, then you have to apply it to reality. If you want to do something that looks impossible, you have to apply it to reality. So
Well,
because people do training and they go and they put it on the shelf, right?
right.
Or
It's
they go and get an international strategy firm and they put it on the shelf. Millions of dollars it costs, on the shelf, right? The only way you can do it is this wicked problem solving way. So you're growing, your relationships are growing, but you're applying it to reality. And then you're looking back and you're learning and you're saying, oh, that's interesting. What can we do there that worked? What did we do there that didn't work? What can we do better next time?
yeah,
And that takes courage.
it
To
does. It
admit to
takes
your
time.
peers that, well, I didn't do well in that particular situation. I could have done better.
Right.
So I used to see top teams sitting around cracking jokes and all that stuff, which was all about not talking about the issues. In one of my books, I listed all the things I saw people not talking about. It was pretty much everything to do with running a business.
Wow. So, what do you think? I'm curious. Actually, it's like two questions that I have in my mind, but I'll ask one first. So, I'm curious when you're working with these people, what types of, and I'm going to say skills here, but I think that there's a lot there that could be like competencies, that could be, mindset pieces. Like, what things are you really trying to, are there a few in particular that you could pinpoint that you're really trying to help these people develop as you're coaching them?
Well, I think I gave a talk, I think it was last week, to a group of very, very wealthy investors. And basically, it was called Raising Consciousness for Strategic Success in a Virtual World. And I
Mm,
think they're the competencies. So, raising consciousness. So, what is consciousness? And I defined it as seeing reality and yourself as they are.
mhm.
Now, that's a lifetime's work. I can't tell you how often I've sat with top teams and they've been having a conversation about reality and they're just talking waffle, nothing to do with what's really happening at all, right? Because if you divide the world down into tame problems, there's a lovely graphic of this. It's all these blind men with the elephant, and one's got the elephant's tail and is
Right.
solving a problem with a rope, and one's got the elephant's leg and is solving a problem with a tree trunk, and one's got the elephant's the nose, the spout, whatever elephants have,
Yep.
and is solving a problem with that. So
Mhm.
they're all having a completely different conversation, and nobody's saying, but actually it's an elephant. Yeah.
Right.
So unless you can see that you've got an elephant, how can you possibly come up with anything sensible? But the lucky thing is, pretty much all your competitors are as bad as you are. So
Mhm.
because all your competitors aren't seeing the elephant either, you get away with it.
Right.
But hey, the person who steps back and sees the elephant and then works on the elephant, they just go, it's an exponential curve. And that's what a big part of my work was. Now, to see the elephant, first you have to realize you've got a blindfold on, so you better take it off. And then you've got to realize you've got to listen to each other. Well, maybe if we're all touching the same thing and we're all seeing it,
Right.
maybe we put all of that together, right? And because I'm going to have to learn to trust these people. I'm not going to, instead of saying, oh, you're an idiot or you're a fraud or whatever it is people are saying to each other, well, maybe he has a point of view. I don't like it. It's not the same as mine, but maybe I could listen. So You get people to listen, to trust, to speak their truth,
Yeah.
to see themselves in their position. I mean, I have to admit I am blind. I don't want to admit if I'm the blind person, I'm sitting on top of an
Mm-hmm.
elephant, all of that. So that's the first part. Then once you've seen it's an elephant, what on earth are we going to do about it? How do I learn to work with elephants?
Right.
Do I want an elephant? Can I sell it to the zoo? Can I take kids for a ride? How can I make money out of this elephant? I mean, I've seen people look at problems that they've had for years that have cost them millions of dollars and turn them into $billion success stories.
Wow.
Right? Because they've seen it differently.
They just look at it
Right? So
differently.
there's a lot of skills in there, and they're all very practical. They're very practical.
Well, and I know you shared the story of this sort of like merger on merger earlier, but maybe walk us through, from the point, like maybe an example story of someone that you've worked with and, sort of what they were this the whole project. Like, I'm just really curious how you approach this. And again, if you let me know too, like if this is how you approached it in the past, may not be how you're going to be approaching it now, but let me know if there's different things too.
Yeah. So there is. I'll just start by saying there is a change in my way of looking at the world. So these projects that I did, people would pay me, I don't know, $10 million. If they're going to make another 2 billion, 10 million for me is nothing.
Right.
So they were big projects. And they lasted a long time, and I had a lot of consultants. And I don't want that level of responsibility anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to work with people. I'm happy to work with top teams. To do those massive change programs is not how I want to spend my time.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always come from a spiritual base, which I didn't articulate.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to do is teach others. I want to teach the people that do want to do it, the people that do want the responsibility, and the leaders that want to make an ethical choice to work in a way that makes the world a better place.
Yeah.
So that's the change I'm in. So these investors I was talking to last week, called the Impact Club, and I'm a member of it. And it's some of the wealthiest families in this country
Mm-hmm.
who want to invest their money in making the world a better place.
Mm-hmm.
They're the people I want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So you asked an example. So it's a long time ago now, but we had a company called Pasmito, and it was a mining company.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a shocker. It was that one of their mines was a place called Port Pirie, and they were pumping lead out into the air, and all the kids had 2 or 3 IQ points lower than anywhere else because of the lead in their blood. They had another mine called Smelter mine, which is in the middle of Australia, and basically was on Aboriginal land, and the Aboriginals were sitting in, and there were people patrolling the mine with guns. I mean, it was just a horrible company. Anyway, they went into administration, which meant that they had to have an administrator put in place, and they owed $3.2 billion to 36 different lenders, all of whom did not get on.
Wow.
So I was brought in by the new director, and I worked with him and the advisory board and the administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was another company called Ansett, which was one of our 2 major airlines at the time, that went into administration on the same day.
Oh.
And all the staff got sacked. The company closed, they sold the aeroplanes, everyone. Now, the guy I worked with was this guy, Greg Daly, and he said, we are going to get this company out of administration, and then we are going to restructure the lead and zinc industry globally. And Margot, you're going to do the people side. Right? I thought he was a nut. I loved him dearly. I'd been working with him for years. I thought he was nuts. But that's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
So those 36 different lenders all took us 1 cent in the dollar. We came out of administration, so Pasmito became a company called Oz Minerals. Now, how did I do that? I worked one-on-one with all those people, with the board, with each member of the top team, with the administrators. Then I got them together. We did a lot of work with the subconscious. I do a lot of Jungian sand play. So we did a lot of symbolic work. We did a lot of visualizing. We did a lot of honesty, and we did a lot of truth telling, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were away with the board at the top team doing their strategy, and the chairman stood up and he said, our number one strategic issue is we will do nobody and nothing any harm.
Mm.
Now, this is also dirty, smelly lead and zinc mining and a smelting company. We will do nothing and nobody any harm. So they became Oz Minerals. No, they became Zinifex first. They became Zinifex, and then they were the number one growth stock on the Australian stock market. I continued to work with them. They merged with Umicore in Europe. They set up Nearstar and Oz Minerals. Two companies at the time worth $6 billion. So I went into a company owing $3.2 billion, left two companies both worth $6 billion. Wow. The staff, there were more staff than before. There was no lead in blood. The evolution is long.
That's good. How long did
Nobody
that take?
and nothing built each other. About 5 years from the beginning to the end.
Okay. Wow.
I mean, that's changing the whole industry globally.
Yeah.
Right. That's restructuring a global industry. I mean, that's just not turning around a company or getting people to get on with it.
Yeah. So ideally, I know we have talked about this before, but ideally now your preference is to work with these entrepreneurs that are really like social impact. Do I have that right?
Not just entrepreneurs. So there are a growing number of managing directors of big companies have a concept. You know, and they want to do something. They want to make the world a better place. Business, I have seen in my career, business can make the world a better place. It can also make the world a worse place. Unfortunately, most of us do not have the skills to help them make the world a better place. We have skills to make them feel good about themselves.
Yes.
And, you know, yes, it's good to feel good about yourself, but not if you're telling yourself lies.
Right.
And so much of what's going on is we're teaching people to tell themselves lies and then agree with themselves telling lies and not get challenged.
Right.
And then we have, well, in Australia, we have all these royal commissions. I don't know what you have in America, but we have royal commissions, and the royal commission says, no, they're cheating and they're lying and they're, you know, actually funding the child prostitution and goodness knows what else, and they don't even know they're doing it because they've never looked.
Yeah.
And we've never asked them to look, because we want everyone. If we go in as a consultant, we want people to like.
Yeah.
So you don't get people to like you by getting them to look at the truth.
Right.
I never cared if they like me. That's why I charge so much money. You just pay me a lot of money. I don't care. But I do care that you make the world a better place.
Yeah. I was involved.
And guess what? They made.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, they made literally billions more dollars while they made the world a better place.
And that's like, it changes the perspective. It's just like a feel good way. What I was going to say was I was involved in a forum. I want to say it was less than a month ago. So however many weeks ago, but it was called the Circular Economy Forum. And the idea, I don't know if you've heard of that. Yeah. So it was just fascinating.
We have a lot of that here.
Yeah. And it was just a fascinating concept to me. Like I've heard about sustainable and social impact and like all of these things sort of like, you know, separate, you know, but together. And this was really kind of bringing it all together. Like, how can we actually do it all together and make the world a better place? And so that businesses, you know, everything along the line. And it really struck me as a whole new way to consider impact at a large scale.
Absolutely. And we can't do it by being nice. We can do it by being honest. We can do it by raising our consciousness. We can do it by working way past ourselves for the common good, but we have to do it looking at wicked problems.
Yes.
Because if we just look at tame problems, we narrow our perspective too much. We see this much and we're very, I don't know if you've seen A Social Dilemma, this wonderful new video on Netflix. And, you know, Facebook, most successful company in the world, or one of them at the moment. And the young men that made all this money narrowed it down, what they were doing, to a very narrow thing. And that very narrow thing that they have done is killing our young women.
Yeah.
Literally killing them, or getting them to kill themselves and self-harm, you know, increasing suicide, alienation, depression, anxiety. Right? And it's not that they were bad men, they just had this very narrow perspective.
Right.
So if you look at the world with a very narrow perspective, you may well make more money. But do you really want to kill people or have people kill themselves? Do you want to set up a world that is literally a dangerous place for young people to grow up in?
Exactly.
So the only way we can do it is to get people to expand their perspective. And that's about raising our consciousness in line with reality,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not sitting on a mountaintop meditating. I mean, there's that lovely story of the monk, of a monk that was on a mountain meditating. You know, he reached nirvana, walked down to the village, fell over a dog and kicked it, right? You know, reality happens. So unless you can take your nirvana with you into reality, it's not nirvana.
Right. No, it's so fascinating. I mean, and there's so many things that are kind of coming at us these days that can really affect the way that we're navigating our life. But I find this approach that you have, even though it's not necessarily new, right? It's just maybe popular right now. But especially because of what's going on in this time of COVID, because I think so many people are struggling with how to handle what life has sort of thrown at us. And of course, everyone has different levels of struggle, right? But even for some of us who would have said that we were doing okay, it's still difficult. And this is sort of a new way of bringing in, I would say, a new way of learning, because, you know, typically we all, especially at high levels, we all rely on sort of the traditional forms of education. Like if I'm not managing my company correctly, or, you know, things start to fail, like maybe I need to go back for that MBA that I meant to do. But this is a whole new foundational, and quite honestly, the whole purpose of why I created this podcast was because these foundational, again, I say skills, but these foundational pieces of life help you personally and professionally.
Absolutely. Well, what we know is you take yourself everywhere you go. So, you know, if various parts of your life aren't working, the place to start the changes with yourself. But if it stays with you, then your ego grows. All you're doing is growing your ego.
Right.
And you can't really honestly face the problems that we have and embrace the magnitude of those problems from a place of ego.
Mm-hmm. No,
Look at it from a place of,
yeah. No, you can finish.
I was rabbit on, don't worry.
So Margot, is there something that you do? Like, I wonder too, because you've again, going back to your beginnings, you know, you've had challenges in your life as well. Are there things that you do now every day that, you know, help you sort of keep this really grounded in this particular type of mindset?
Definitely. Before I open my eyes every morning, I pray, I meditate, I visualize, and I only pray for God's will. I don't pray, you know, give me another $1 million.
Right.
Who wouldn't want another $1 million? I don't really need another $1 million. But, you know, like, what's your will for me, God?
Right.
Please help me to do your will, whatever it is. And God, just be a bit clearer than you normally are, you know. You can put it in writing and send it in an email. I pray that every morning. I meditate every morning. And then I get up and I do my best to be of service.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So, you know, if something always, I help as many people as I can in a day.
Yeah.
I do as much as I can to be of service in a day. And what I'm about to do, which I'm terribly excited about, is as you mentioned, I've written quite a few books, and a gorgeous young man called Jason read one of my books some years ago, and then set up an IT company based on the philosophy in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to see me recently and said, you know, how would you go on my board? And I said, I don't really do boards. You know, I've been asked a lot, and I don't think. To be honest, I get too bored sitting on board. Anyway, got to be something to do. So, but I said, but I have developed this sort of online program of my philosophy and what I've done and how I've turned companies around. But I don't really have the IT skills, and it's just been sitting there. And so what happened was I developed it, and my gorgeous partner died, and I just couldn't be bothered, really. And then I remarried, and I was having too much fun to be bothered. So it just sort of sat there. And he said, well, look, what we'd like to do is turn it into an international e-course, and we're going to gamify it. Well, I didn't even know what that meant, so I got on Wikipedia, looked up Gamify. It's using the techniques of gaming to
Yep.
make it interactive.
Yep.
So that's all starting next week. So
Wow.
next week, all his bright young people are all coming to my farm, and we're having a workshop to work out how to take it off my computer and make it available to the world. So how
Wow.
about that?
That is so exciting. Now, wait, which book was this based off of? Hit when he did this. Say that again.
Approaching the corporate heart.
Approaching the corporate heart. Okay, got it. Okay, so he based his whole company off of this, and then you had created this sort of like from that book. You created this.
Okay. Yes, I wrote that book a long time ago. But it's the basic philosophy behind what I do. And then I had all these tools, which are the tools that I use. And I put the tools on an online program, but never done anything with it. You know, the problem when you're really comfortable and happy and life's going your way, you kind of lose what I call the fire in the belly, you know?
Sure. Well, it seems like you had that fire was going strong for so long that it needed a break.
And then along came Jason and said, no, we're going to pick it up and make it available. So with skills that as I said, I didn't even know what gamifying was. I mean, I never had the skill to do it. So there you go. This
is so exciting. Now, how will we be able to like keep tabs on this work?
Well, I think it's really you and I talking, and when it's ready, we'll find a way of making it available. And you know, I'm all for partnerships. So you know, more people we can get in partnership. Let's do it. You know, like
because I want to push this out. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you know, I've just seen miracles happen using this way of working. The only way, there's no logical way I can describe what I've seen. Yeah. So I call them miracles. Mm-hmm. And that aluminium smelter that became the world benchmark, they built around their smelter, they built a wetland, which was called Smelter in the Park, and they won 3 World Heritage Awards. Mm. They went out and they built houses and lived in the houses with street kids and taught them how to get jobs. Right? They just changed an entire town. They had things called the Portland Speakers Circle, and they had people like David Suzuki coming into town and speaking to the local people. They put the whole town through a personal development program. They taught the local kids how to play jazz. You know, it was just unbelievable what happened. Mm. And I went into a place where literally people were dying, where literally people were in fear, where they were literally hated. And I remember years later walking through the plant with the managing director, who was a great, big, blokey, Aussie sort of fella. And he said, Margot, there's love in this plant. And there was love in that plant. Yeah. There was. And I thought, the whole world could be like this. The whole world could be like this. We could all have companies that are filled with love, improve the environment, that improve the community, that have people flourish. I was asked to go in because Portland couldn't get anyone to stay. 2 years later, the managing director of Alcoa rang up and said, we can't get anyone to leave Portland. We don't know what you've done, but nobody will leave, and we want to spread the technology that they've got. Wow. It's a miracle.
Yeah. But I love what you said. Just exactly, the whole world can be like that. And that's what I think. I know some people might think when we say things like this that we're being sort of like fluffy and out there. But in all honesty, I truly believe that too. That this type of work, that creating these mindsets, helping people navigate in this enlightened way, maybe I'll use that loosely, but enlightened way, can change the world.
And Kelly, there's nothing fluffy about making another $1 billion. There's nothing fluffy about changing an industry globally. There's nothing fluffy about doing merger, taking over a company twice the size of the company you are. That's what I've done with this technology. Yeah. And what I used to call them the happy consequences are people feel happy. They grow as human beings. Their marriages improve. Their health improves. They go out and they work in the community. They start to open their mind to sustainability. Right? Amazing. They're the happy consequences. Yeah. But if we go in for the happy consequence and we don't get the other stuff, You see, the business is about making money. So if you don't make money, you don't get to play the game. It's like Monopoly,
Hmm.
right? If you don't end up with the money in the houses, you lose.
Right.
So it's not about the money in the house. It's about the community. It's about the growth. It's about making the world a better place.
Right.
And if you do that around what you do as a business, you make more money and
Right.
that's the bit I think a lot of people they
No, I
forget the
totally
and they get
agree.
focused on one.
And how many people have you met that have all of those, the material side of it, right? That have, the money, the stuff, right? That are still empty shells of a person,
I met a lot of people.
right? But it's like, I mean, it's not,
Not even going to well,
well,
a story that was told to be my one of my clients.
yeah.
So one of my clients went to India and did the sorry, it was an aeroplane. And it's only recent. We haven't been getting any airplanes.
Oh
So
no, I
it's
couldn't
only
even
very
hear
new because of
it.
COVID. Yeah, because of COVID, there was no airplanes flying in, and we just got one. So it's good. We're really
Wow.
happy to hear airplanes. It means the world's going back to normal. But one of my clients did the advanced leadership training in India, and then they went back and they met every year for about 20 years. And he said, Margot, out of those 50 people, I'm the only one that's happy.
Wow.
And these were people who do that advanced leadership at India. They're at the top of the tree. They're very expensive. And he said, they all just feel like life's passed them by. They're, while they're in the thick of the buzz of business,
Yep.
they're preoccupied. But once the buzz goes, who or what are they?
Yep.
But this fellow had with me turned around so many companies and enriched the lives of so many people, right? And he'd grown in himself, right? And I'm not talking about now. I have a deep spiritual belief. This man never did, and I don't think he ever will. But he's
Mhm.
just a really solid, decent human being that makes the world a better place.
Yeah.
And from that place of solidness and decency, he has that inner, what is it, peace,
Yes.
joy.
Because if you keep chasing the stuff as opposed to being fulfilled by helping the people every day, it's you just drain everything from you.
Right? I mean, I did both, I have to say. I just overdid it. So one of the reasons I bought my farm and moved, I say 10 years ago, I moved to Byron Bay to raise grandchildren and chickens. And, the reason I did that is I just was burnt out, you
Yeah.
know. I had this very deep spiritual belief. I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a trained hypnotist, I have a very deep, rich inner life. But I also had an unbelievably hectic outside life. I had the biggest change company in this country, right? And I had all these people flying around the world, and I just was exhausted, and I got sick, you know.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be Superwoman anymore. I can't.
Yeah.
So, I became a very unsuperwoman. And all I can say is since I've been an unsuperwoman,
It's not
the
really
happiness
unsuper though.
joy.
It's still super.
It's not. One of my PAs left and set up a company called Busy and Important. I'm not busy and important anymore. I'm busy, but I'm a nana that raises chooks and grandchildren. And I might still mentor people around the world. I may still get to talk to people, some of the
Yeah.
most important people in the world. But it's like, oh well, that's what I'm doing today. It's not the middle of my existence, you know.
Right.
And because of that, I mean, I'm as comfortable working with a drunk or an
Yeah.
addict as I am working with a managing director or a prime
Yeah.
minister. And they're just as important,
Yep.
right? It's one is no more important than the other, right?
Completely.
So coming from that place, I get to live in this amazing place of peace and joy and serenity, which is just, I don't know, better than being exhausted, which is what I used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I cannot blame you at all. And the funny thing is that as we come close to the end of our time, Margot, I was going to say to you, are there any last parting words? But it's hard to top what you just described because you've just described inner peace. But
well, I live in it, so I look out of my window and all I see are rolling hills, trees, and cows down to the ocean. That's what I see.
wow.
And I'd say it's 200, 280-degree view from my lounge room. And I just think I live in God's world.
Yep.
I just
sounds like it.
So, I don't really, after the prayer and the meditation, I don't have to do much. I just got to look out the window.
But I'm sure you still do a lot.
Oh, I do.
Yes, I'm sure you do. It sounds like you're still helping amazing people. Well, and also you have this new course, there's just still so many things. So, I think hopefully you will never be as busy and to yourself to the point of burnout by any means. We don't want you to go there, but it sounds like things are maybe heating back up.
The problem, how can I put it? When you love what you are doing, you don't feel like you're doing it.
Not work. Right.
But my husband looks at me and he says, "You're so busy. You're so busy."
You know what? It's so my husband says the same thing.
I'm just, and you're just doing what you love.
Yep. Yep. It's sometimes I have to tell myself though, you need to walk out of the room that is my office because, there are other people here. So, that is what pulls me out. But I mean, there are plenty of days where I completely lose track of time, because it's fun.
And for me, it's being out with people, I on the weekend, I addressed a community lunch. And that was just so heartwarming, people living in community, working together to make the community better.
Yeah.
Today I'm talking to you, and I don't know how many people around the world are watching.
I know,
last
right?
week I was talking to the wealthiest families in the country, and you just do what you do.
Yep. No, this has been so fabulous. I so appreciate you joining me. I really hope that you and I can still continue to have conversations because I'm really excited for what's coming up. But anyone else who's out there listening, if they want to follow Margot, she is available on LinkedIn and her website, which I'm going to try to get this last name pronunciation, Margot Cairnes. Close?
Cairnes.
Cairnes.
Cairnes. Cairnes.
Yes, Cairnes. So margotcairnes.com. See, I'm going to just spell it. Forget me. Don't listen to my American accent. Margot, CAIRNES.com. That's where you can find her. And definitely keep in touch because when I share this, I'll put in all the books because especially that one book that you mentioned, but all of them super fabulous. So keep in touch with Margot, everybody. And thank you all for listening in to Let's Talk About Skills, Baby. You can find this, I say podcast, but I guess the podcast part is on iTunes and Spotify, but it's also available in video on YouTube. And you can find me at Kelly Ryan Bailey on all the various social channels. Really appreciate if you would offer some feedback, rating and review, anything just to know what other types of things you want to hear would be great. But thank you, Margot, so much for joining us today. Again, really appreciate the time. Love everything that you're doing. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kelly.